Hello, this is going to be another episode of the Nick Carroll Show, back from hiatus due to issues outside the content creation space. So I'm going to rant a bit on an issue that's near and dear to me, and that's journalism, the coverage of news, and how it's been slanted heavily to the left for the most part. So if you've seen the timestamp on this episode, I just want to say buckle up, but I'll respect you if you jump off before this journey ends. So I want to talk a bit about media bias, particularly cable news bias, since that's what I tend to watch more than I read articles online. But this logic does extend to newspapers and their related online sites. So with all this talk about fake news, I wanted to rant a little bit about it. Anyone with two brain cells to rub together can see there's bias in the mainstream media. All of it. And while that's something you expect in niche media, it's honestly no different in the mainstream. And in my opinion, there are no objective media outlets in any format that I'm aware of, at least. Not CNN, not PBS, not NPR, not broadcast networks like ABC, CBS, or NBC, not cable networks like CNN, MSNBC, or the one beacon of right-wing counter-media, Fox News. And while I'm not a newspaper guy, none of the biggest newspapers out there like the New York Times or the Washington Post are objective. And when it comes to online sites, I'm not aware of any nonpartisan news or opinion outlets out there outside of aggregator sites. So there's a focus on fake news that mostly targets conservative or right-wing outlets that provide either a counter-narrative or that cover stories and present facts that the other side will offer, or these right-wing sites will frame things in a different light that disrupts the left-wing arguments. There's been a left-wing bias in news for as long as I've been alive, and I'm in my late 40s. And it's always been partisan, but over a century ago, objectivity in news was actually paraded as a virtue and something to be pursued. But the bias in the news media has never really gone away. And these left and right-wing factions still exist, but under the pretense of neutrality. And the general public believe that, at least the one that they're focused on watching, that these news agencies are objective when clearly they're not. So in my opinion, we, the people, have been lied to by the press, the reporters of truth. And these are the only constitutionally protected professionals, occupation, whatever you want to call it, in this country. And these people lie to us every day. The reality is the press and the mainstream media will often cover something with a slanted angle and then claim they've covered it significantly or fairly when they did not. They blur the lines between a reporter and a host, a journalist and a pundit, and other contributor types. And I'm certainly willing to criticize Fox News as being just as biased as everyone else. But if there wasn't for Fox News and their little sister network, Fox Business, those two cable channels, what right-wing cable news outlets would there be on TV? Well, the answer is obvious. There wouldn't be one. Every other network that's on cable or even broadcast, they're left-wing. Fox News wouldn't even be possible without the left-wing bias everywhere else. And in fact, the existence of Fox News is to fill a void that the rest of the mainstream media neglects. And that is a press that isn't biased to the left. So let me give you a couple examples from the biggest offender, at least in my opinion, CNN. They tend to frame their coverage under two paradigms. The first paradigm is media versus anti-media. And their second paradigm is real versus fake news. Fake news and anti-media are not exactly the same as how the right frames the issues or the facts, and how liberal media outlets handpick the stories they cover or ignore or even deny other facts. Even the right-wing news outlets don't call the liberal media anti-media, though some conservative pundits like Sean Hannity and Jesse Watter will call CNN fake news, and obviously it's a response to the claims in the reverse. But the left failed to understand that the issue is bias, not anti-media and fake news. And remember, the left started calling Fox fake news years ago. Back essentially when Barack Obama took control, they considered Fox as just right-wing or far-right news. That's their claim. So naturally, they don't like fake news being used against them, which is why the right uses this in the first place. So let's define the paradigmatic nature of these two narratives. In the media versus anti-media narrative, and this is the newer of the two narratives, the left essentially tout their approved networks and supported fact checkers as media, the mainstream. They argue essentially that left-wing networks like CNN or Newsweek or those kind of publications, or even Huffington Post or those kind of sites, they're just mainstream, maybe moderate or centrist or whatever, but in the mainstream. In other words, you should take them seriously, etc. And they look at or frame Fox News and Breitbart and other sites like that as anti-media. That's this paradigm. So fake news sites and right-wing blogs are all in this world of anti-media that somehow use a different set of facts or opinions than those offered on CNN and the other networks that are like them, aka the left-wing networks. That's where you get alternative facts from as a phrase. Somehow only the right wing can engage in conspiracy theories. Only reporting and opinions supplied by this mainstream media can be trusted. That's what CNN and their kind argue. Now, when it comes to that second paradigm, the real versus fake news narrative, it's similar, much the same thing, but with the focus on things like social networks like Facebook and Twitter, or blogs or online websites that share information from a variety of sites that promote either real or fake information. And surprise, surprise, the focus is on right-wingers or the far right who share that information and not left-wingers. They argue this primarily occurs from pro-Trump people or neocons or conservatives, or they often conflate these, or the religious right or whatever. And naturally these fake news or anti-media sites are all tied in. So naturally the solution to this fake news is the same thing as their solution to the anti-media, and that is stick to the mainstream media. Don't diverge from the right side, the correct side of the paradigm. And that's essentially what they're selling in both of these narratives. So what does that mean really? Well, it means that these networks and papers want you to only watch or read their news coverage and listen to their opinions, and they want social networks like Facebook and Twitter to automatically or even manually prevent unapproved truth or whatever from trending or coming to the foreground or becoming popular. And they're even comfortable with up to censoring news and opinion from these unapproved sites. So the goal is to create a blacklist of sites to better control the narrative. Just keep in mind that alternative media isn't anti-media. Those are two different things. Right now, because of this relatively new term, the alt-right or the alternative right, anything using the word alt or alternative is now suddenly evil, which I'm sure is news to an entire genre of music, alternative music, electro, pop, all that kind of stuff. That kind of, being an alternative to left-wing media is not necessarily evil, although that's exactly how these people paint it. But media outside of this mainstream needs to become the option to turn to, or perhaps a new form of mainstream media that we can turn to if it offers more facts, more information, more details, more objectivity and fairness, than the old media. And I think that's something that the old media, like cable news networks and talk radio to some extent, and newspapers are fearful of, this new way of getting information from the internet that isn't filtered by the purveyors of truth. And the irony here is that we all know who these people were that were advocates of fake news in the first place. Dozens upon dozens of reporters and journalists, hosts and pundits on these major networks and newspapers who colluded with the Hillary Clinton campaign during the 2016 election, and the Democratic National Committee and other groups that are related. And these were all revealed in leaked emails by John Podesta and the DNC, as published by WikiLeaks. And these networks and publications who craft obvious political narratives and clearly slant their coverage to benefit their candidates of choice, i.e. Hillary Clinton over Bernie Sanders, over Jill Stein and everyone else on the right, but they have preferences. That's why a lot of people commonly call CNN the Clinton News Network, or MSNBC, MSHRC, right? I mean, people understand, what these networks are tuned towards, and there's more proof that the Democrats unduly affected this, election through collusion with the mainstream media and these other sort of agencies out there than the Russians did. I mean, if you want to know who got screwed the most out of the left, it's Bernie Sanders. And anyone that voted for Bernie, pretty much anyone that voted for Bernie in the primary, understands what the DNC did to them and realizes that wasn't necessarily fair, but Bernie wasn't the approved Democrat, to run, and so that is what it is. So bottom line is, I don't want the press to control the news in this fashion, or pick a winner, or pick their candidate of choice, even if they don't mention that it's the candidate that they chose. It should be obvious by their actions who they've selected to win, but it shouldn't take someone like me to inform others. Anyways, I'll digress there. I don't want these people to tell me what I want to hear either. I don't want the press to tell me anything less than the truth, using all of the facts, not just some facts that they select because it suits their narrative, on either side, left or right. And right now, the mainstream media only wants to tell you what they want you to hear. And that's why audiences are split between the mainstream media and other media. And that's why they're essentially sort of running away from the mainstream media, and why networks like CNN and MSNBC are so desperate to cling to the audience they have, which is why they focus on Trump, Russia, and collusion, and all this kind of stuff. That's really the high bar. There's a really high bar to prove any of this stuff, but they're aiming for that because that brings ratings. Whereas going into the particulars of a healthcare plan or whatever doesn't bring the boys to the yard for that milkshake or whatever. But bottom line, that's why a lot of people like me no longer trust these networks or publications, and that's why the ratings are even lower than the president. And that's a very difficult thing to do, considering how much they've hammered the president on everything. So anyways, if you watch CNN and then turn it over to Fox News, do you think you're going to get the same information from both networks, told the same way, with the same adjectives used for the same candidates or political actors or whoever? Are they going to use the same descriptions? Do you think you'll get the full story from either network? The answer is no, really. I mean, I think most people can agree to that and understand that objectively, and I think we should get information from both sides. And unfortunately, neither side is willing to present all the information. They sort of hedge bet on what narrative they're willing to sell, and I just don't think that's good. Anyone can see the mainstream media has a clear left-wing bias, and they protected and supported President Obama during his, presidency, and Hillary Clinton during her run-up to the presidency, more than 2 years. And of course, they protected her for decades, because she's on their team, and they were much more critical on, against pretty much anyone on the right. They loved John McCain for the longest time during the primary, but once he won the primary, in the 2008 election, bam, they turned on him like crazy. They somewhat treated Mitt Romney the same way, sort of slanting him as a semi-progressive from the right or a moderate right, person, center right, whatever. And then the instant he won the primary, it was just hatchets, spears, arrows, and it was just nuts. And it's obvious. Anyone with half a brain can see what's going on. Yet CNN and other networks like this sort of pretend that doesn't happen. Suddenly the press discovered they need to have this critical role against this president. And they look back, oh, were we too kind on the White House and the role of the president? Only once we have a President Trump, suddenly they see the light. When you broadcast or print your bias, you put it out there for all of us to see. I don't want CNN or MSNBC or whoever, the New York Times or whatever, to go away. I want them to stop pretending that they're neutral, objective, nonpartisan, fair, or presenting all the facts, or that they're somehow not painting narratives. It's not exactly the best metaphor, painting narratives, but whatever. What I'd like to see is a news channel that is all of the above in lieu of CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News, or the broadcast networks, right? ABC, CBS, and NBC. And I know a lot of people on the left don't quite understand what I'm talking about, although I think more of them are waking up to it now that they've seen Bernie Sanders get screwed by the Democrats and, the major networks. But I've been distrusting the media, the mainstream media, as it's called, for decades now. But the reason is because I've seen how often they lie. And I'm not just talking about just one side. I've watched so many network news, episodes, the different programs and the different pundits and different hosts and the different shows over the decades that, and as well as these headlines and articles and other things like that, that it's beyond the point of absurdity. And I totally understand why so few people like me now have trust for the media, mainstream or otherwise. So from my point of view, a lot of you people on the left are just too trusting of media because, at least for the last 8 years, because it's the majority of media and they're all on the same page and they're all pretty much agreeing, telling you what you want to hear and the stuff that you agree with, that you don't understand how the media is slanting the stories or misrepresenting facts, and it's hard for you to distrust them. And I get that. But if someone lies to you once, you might forgive them. If they lie to you 10 times, it's a little harder to forgive. What about 100 times, 1,000 times? At what point do you distrust these people? Well, if all you're doing is listening to one side, your side, that has a bad effect. It hurts your ability to see the truth because you're only getting information from one side. Think of it this way. The left presents a bunch of facts. The right presents a bunch of facts. Sometimes the facts one or both sides presents are correct, but you don't have enough of all of the information to make an objective decision, a credible, logical, rational decision, because you're missing some elements here and some elements there to get a real perspective, right? That's one aspect. I've explained this to a friend of mine recently over the weekend, a very close friend. So that's one thing, and I brought it up under the phrase of combating facts. Not saying that necessarily what you want to do is combat facts, like, hey, this is fact, it's objectively true, it's not something that's deniable, therefore you want to combat it. What I'm saying is, too often you only get a little bit of information here, but it's not all of the facts. So there's this other side, and they're all too willing to give you a lot of other facts that you can look at all this information and come to your own decision that's not necessarily in the middle or in the center, but you can sort of put into your wallet and then come out with some sort of currency that allows you to better exchange whatever, value in terms of discussion or whatever. I know it's kind of a weird metaphor, maybe I shouldn't have used it, but long story short is you need more facts, not less. And it's too often CNN or Fox News isn't going to give you all of the facts, right? And if you're willing to, as a person on the left, say, oh, well, of course Fox News is biased to the right. Why can't you also admit that CNN is biased to the left. If Fox News is biased to the right, is CNN further to the right or further to the left? I'm not saying the center is necessarily in between these people, but if you can tell what direction they're aiming and what direction they're aiming, that's important. And all I ask you to do is to see that. So with pretty much everyone on the left agreeing to the same narrative, and a lot of other people on the left that watch them, they all think they're all in this moderate centrist camp. But the fact is the rest of the world, the rest of the reality, and that vacuum is being filled by Fox News. And keep in mind, the media can't really deny their own responsibility for the distrust that the public has in them. Fox News has only been around for 20 years, and they exist because that market is open for them. Since CNN, MSNBC, and ABC, CBS, NBC, PBS have shut down and marginalized conservatives pretty much en masse, they pretty much kicked them out. These right-wing voices have to go somewhere else. Enter Fox News. And the reason why the press has been compromised in terms of credibility and believability and all that is because it's not interested in presenting all the facts. So I'd mentioned that whole aspect of presenting all the facts, left and right, facts presented by this agency, and this agency, because it allows you to make other decisions. Well, often when you get enough of the facts, you can tell that sometimes maybe this fact claimed by this person isn't actually a fact. Maybe it's a little bit of information that, in light of everything else, turns out to be not true. And that's the second part of my argument with my friend in terms of combating facts was sometimes someone will present something as a fact. They believe earnestly that this is factually correct, but in fact it's not. And so they're wrong unintentionally, and that influences people in the wrong way. And so you have to have this ability to check each other. That's why you have watchdog groups against the media that basically watch the media, read the media, click on all these sites, and they look at quotes and sources and all this other information, and they put them in a context and they ascertain the validity of these claims. That whole market exists because there's already a distrust of the media. That's why I have like a newspaper, and they'll have someone that doesn't technically work there they'll be from the outside, and they'll essentially work as an ombudsman to sort of cut out the fringe claims and stuff in these articles, and that helps to ground that newspaper into presenting more realistic stories. But these kind of positions are no longer being filled. That's why you have to have these watchdog groups. So if the press is not going to be presenting all the facts, then it's up to others to do so. If the press is no longer interested in objective, nonpartisan reporting, that's a problem. Are they actually being journalists anymore? Are they actually fulfilling the role of the press at that point? If they're just telling a story that it benefits their side politically or benefits the ideology of those working at that agency or whatever, then in my opinion, it ceases to be a good thing. It's no longer an impartial agency. It then serves a different purpose than informing the public. It then becomes something that wants to shape public opinion. And at that point, it's a negative force, not a positive one. I mean, we protect the media, in my opinion, or as far as I know, more than any other country in the world. And that's no small achievement, because I think we recognize the purpose of a free media and free press and the right to all these other things that that sort of outlined in the First Amendment, but all these other rights. But that we protect an actual occupation in a way that we protect no other, that importance shouldn't be lost. And I feel like the people that are in these occupations, many of these people are doing a disservice to the public that they pretend to serve. So I just think that's a negative, not a positive. So I just don't think we have objective media outlets anymore. It's one thing to be fiercely partisan and open about it, but it's another thing entirely to do the same but be deceptive about it. And that only fragments people their attention in, they look for other sources to watch or to read or listen to rather than the sources that tell them everything they want to hear. They'll tend to turn to something that'll tell them things they need to know so they can make better informed opinions. We need objective media, and if we don't have that anymore, we're losing something that actually improves society. When you watch CBS News, CNN, NBC, Fox, whatever, do you trust them? Do you unconditionally believe every word they say? Or do you perhaps pause or hesitate, to believe in what they report, what they tell you? Do you believe that they won't omit details that could better inform you? Can they be wrong? Can they lie? Can they have an agenda to tell a story that deviates from the truth? The press is publicly grappling with their issue of being wrong, not by admitting that they're being partial, but by claiming that they didn't focus on checking the presidency for abuses of power or being the hard-hitting investigative journalists that report corruption or whatever. They still believe that they're unbiased and just blindsided by things that they overlooked. And that doesn't sell well. You can't look at them as being these professionals that worked in the industry for years and decades as somehow being naive because President Barack Obama happens to agree with some of the things that they agree with. No one buys that anymore. We're not kids. And I just think that they're lying to themselves and lying to us. Right-wing media isn't taken seriously by the mainstream media because the mainstream media is left-wing. That is why. It's not a mystery. The left pretends it's not because it's not as left-wing as they'd like to be, maybe. Maybe if you're Michael Moore, CNN is just a corporation that wants to, blah, blah, blah. But he's way crazy on the left. That doesn't mean that CNN is not also on the left, just not radically so. Maybe they're not RT or whatever, Russia Today or the Young Turks or whatever, or MSNBC on a bad day, or a good day, I guess, depending upon your perspective. But that doesn't mean the rest of us can't look at CNN and say, look at what they're arguing for. Look at what they're denying. Look at what narrative that they're spinning. How is that not left-wing? Just because it's not uber Marxist or libertarian socialist or anarcho-communist or straight out of Stalin or whatever, Most of the people that I interact with on politics only get information from one source or one point of view. So I feel like I have to educate them just to have a conversation with them. And, I'm talking a lot to some extent about real life friends, but also some people that I associate with online, privately. And unfortunately, too many people just don't want to hear the other side because it conflicts with what they've been told or the narrative they believe in, regardless of the facts. And often these people, like their narrative gets crushed if they listen to too much on the other side, and it's too hard for them to deal with it, or they just don't believe it. I've had debates with friends who I'll point out legitimate facts, or here's video proof, or here's an article that outlines this, and the response is literally just bullshit, or I don't feel that way, or these people are idiots. And it's like, that's not a valid response to the points that I'm bringing up. So we can't go anywhere with the dialogue that we have because, they think I'm threatening them with counter information, I'm challenging all their claims, and, these people don't want to be told no or you're wrong, as if the intent behind my corrections or statements or facts are meant to impugn them. And I think that's a bad thing. I think that's a natural outcome to having a media that's split. You'll have people essentially listen to left-wing or just right-wing media, just one or the other. And so they get sucked into this world where only these facts exist. And when you confront them with something that shines a negative light on that or presents conflicting information, they just don't know how to handle it. And part of this is because the left-wing media pretends it's not left-wing media, Or maybe they legitimately think they're not left-wing media, or that they're all magically moderate centrists, because, obviously it's not as left-wing as they'd like to be, or their version of left and right is skewed, But, and so what they look at is, hey, what I'm doing is in the middle of the road response to this, therefore what I'm talking about and the way I'm phrasing this can't come from a left-wing perspective. And coincidentally, all these people are on the left, and you can see it if you're anywhere on the right. So let's think about the Young Turks, for example. They're a YouTube channel, they probably have a website, whatever. I don't really follow them that much because I have a hard time dealing with that, just like I have a hard time dealing with certain super right-wing sites that are deliberately obtuse in the way that the Young Turks, like InfoWars, in a lot of ways they're deliberately obtuse about a lot of stuff in the way that the Young Turks are. Not trying to be offensive to everyone that works in those organizations. There's a couple people I like in the Young Turks, a couple people I like in InfoWars, but pretty much you understand these as bastions of leftism and rightism in terms of the new media that's out there that's a response to Fox News and NBC and all that kind of stuff. So the Young Turks, they're supposed to be a left-wing version of Fox News, but in this new media. Vox.com is also supposed to be a left-wing Fox News sort of site online. What these people don't realize is that Fox News was just a right-wing CNN and MSNBC. Breitbart is just a right-wing Huffington Post. And all these other sites, they're just the opposite of Salon and Slate and these others, And they have these shows either online or on networks that range between your nightly national news, a la ABC and CBS and the other broadcast networks like NBC. And the rest of their programming follows along this left-wing cable news networks or right-wing. Without all this left-wing media, there would be no need for right-wing media and vice versa. But we're stuck in this world where everything has been polarized left and right. And ultimately, I think that's harming the public in general. So with that in mind, that there's staunch left and right-wing news outlets and publications and blogs and all that kind of stuff, I'm asking for you watching this and others, you're welcome to share this to others, to look for 2 left-wing sources if you're on the right and 2 right-wing sources if you're on the left. Diversify your intellectual portfolio. Learn to get both sides of the argument so you can make better sense of any issue and better detect fake news or alt news or whatever the hell. Don't be gaslit by either side. There are too many people in the media, mainstream or niche, that are just gaslighting the public. And it's not just annoying, it's tiring. Bill Maher, most of the late night talk show hosts, and these people pay no price for being wrong. In fact, their bet is they get better ratings for skewing so far to one side or the other and giving token responses to the alternative and essentially destroying them on their shows, like Samantha Bee and all that kind of stuff. And they live in their gated communities with their millions of dollars and live the lifestyles of the rich and famous, and their ignorance doesn't affect them. There's a negative side effect of these leftists, progressives, whatever, their mainstream media, the establishment press, and their networks, essentially painting a negative stereotype of all conservatives and libertarians and liberals who don't fall in line with their agenda or propaganda or whatever, right? And they just accuse all these people as racist and sexist and homophobes and Islamophobes and bigots and all the other phobes and this I can't think of. And, and while that allows the left to win elections, or at least up through 2008 it did, and to a limited extent in 2012, it pushes that agenda. The result is a more divided country. And a lot of us people on the right just want more objectivity in all news, not just the left, but they also want to, at Fox News, for example. So there's a divide on the right, if the left is unaware of this, there's a divide on the right in terms of how to deal with Fox News. There's the pro-Trump side of Fox News, and there's the anti-Trump not quite never Trump, but anti-Trump side of Fox News. And there's a sort of congealing there. But there's a lot of people on the right that aren't working for that network or don't visit on the network or whatever. They just watch it. And they're conflicted about how the network as a whole, as well as certain people on the network, support Trump in such a way that they would not tolerate the left from doing. So that's a perspective here that I don't think the left is accurately trying to portray, because honestly, most of them don't care. CNN doesn't really care about this divide on the right. We're all just these evil bigots and all this kind of stuff, and we're all fake news and stuff like that. So, I mean, what's their incentive to care? Well, I don't care about these people. I care about you, the people that watch these networks and read these newspapers. And, I don't have to convince left-wing people to not trust Fox News or any of the right-wing sites. I mean, right? If you're a leftist, you would certainly concede that you would trust Fox and these other sites less than like HuffPo or Salon or the Young Turks or whatever, right? Most of you won't know more than a handful of names of those on the right and those opinionists with their own shows like Sean Hannity or Bill O'Reilly, back when he had his show. I'm not asking you to watch them. If you're a leftist, I'm not asking you to watch Sean Hannity all the time, as much as just question the news you do get from the sources you get them from, and look for news in alternative sources that are not ideologically aligned with the left-wing media, just to get another perspective. Because as someone on the right, I can tell you explicitly and implicitly what you're being told by the Young Turks about people like me is wrong, is completely inaccurate. And it's easier for you to side with someone like Cenk Uygur or the others on his network than me, because you know their names and you watch them all the time and they become people you trust. But they're not 100% accurate. And even if they believe 100% what they're doing, they believe that they're better than us and all that kind of stuff, like Anna Kasparian claims, you have to understand that this polarization, this divide that's getting worse, is in large part because of these news networks, press outlets, whatever. And you have the ability to do something when these people clearly don't. I mean, most of the people that are watching or listening to this, you're just average people like me, or political laymen, laywomen, laypersons, whatever. You're just the average Joe, just trying to learn about the world and trying to navigate and trying to find out if you're going to have a job in 10 years or whatever, right? All of us on the right, we're just like you. We just happen to have a slightly different paradigm that we deal with and perspective and all that kind of stuff. We're not evil any more than you're evil. And this dichotomy that's being created by the left and the right networks, ostensibly for ratings, is hurting everyone. If people can at least get that from this episode, then this episode will be worth it. And the reason why this media bias is such an important issue to recognize and discuss is because there's a world of information, facts, and irrefutable data that the left is willing to completely ignore, cover up, argue against, or even attack anyone who finds out this information and pass it along to everyone else. That's why they're trying to control this narrative, because if you can only agree to and believe what they're willing to tell you, then that's less work they have to do. They're automatically punishing their enemy by making you only listen to them or read them. The left is, in effect, lying to everyone because they have an agenda they want to push. And keep in mind, when I'm talking about left, I'm talking about these people that make money. They're professionals, pundits, professors, the politicians, the political class, as they like to call themselves, etc. They think all this is correct, that this activity that they're doing, and that it's worth doing regardless of the efficiency of it, because the goal is worth it and nothing else matters, so long as they win and the consequences be damned. This isn't merely an issue of the ends justifying the means. It doesn't matter that the ends that they want even occurs. It never will, because the ends will not be battle tested, because of the ability to have all facts represented. If you invest in a business, but you're not presented all the information in the business, and then that business goes out of business because of that information that you were denied, wouldn't you want to know why you went out of business? And wouldn't you blame those people that only told you the information they wanted you to hear for misleading you? That's the issue here. But these people don't care. The truth that they are presenting to you is in actuality a lie, but they don't care. They hope hard enough that they can will the end that they want to in existence, no matter how they get there. They just want it to happen. That utopia that they want will come at whatever cost that needs to be to get there, and they'll never recognize that it's never going to come, because the methods that they're using don't stand the test of time and cannot work and won't work. And even people on the left will fight against other people on the left because they're not left enough, or they're not progressive enough, or they're not liberal enough, or whatever. And if you get rid of everyone on the right, all the ones that believe in personal freedom, economic liberty, limited government, all that kind of stuff, property rights, life, liberty, and property, all that kind of stuff. Let's say you successfully get rid of all these people. Let's say you get Fox out of business, Breitbart out of business, all these right-wing outlets out of business. You now have the new left and right paradigm. And what you're going to find out that in reality, people want life, liberty, and property. People want to conserve what is theirs. They want to conserve their perspective. They want to conserve what works. They want to preserve maybe certain traditions or whatever like that, even if it's the new set of traditions. Right now we see a divide on the left where liberals and progressives are fighting against each other because the left isn't far enough for the other leftists. That's where the Gamergate controversy came about, because not everyone on the left wanted to deal with the progressive stack and intersectionality. So if you successfully get rid of everyone on the right, what you then end up getting is this new left versus right paradigm. And while a lot of people on the left want that to happen, where everyone gets shifted further to the left by whatever metric that they consider to be left, the fact is reality is that absolute spectrum of left and right. And sooner or later you're going to get people on the left that go, hey, I do want property rights. Hey, I do want individual liberty and personal freedoms and stuff like that. And I don't want to be part of the collective, or I don't want to have all my rights taken away. And they will drift to the right. And then you're left trying to squash this forever. And it's the same thing on the left. So that's what I'm trying to, this podcast or whatever is essentially for the people on the left that don't quite understand what us on the right are talking about. And I hope this can sort of provide some illumination. This heaven on earth that they're trying to build that isn't heaven because that's what Christians and Jews believe, but whatever, this man-made perfect world that's ran by imperfect mankind somehow, that's why it'll fail. We're all flawed. And we can at least try to make things better, but that can't come if uncomfortable facts from the right and inconvenient truths are ignored. These mainstream media types and their ignorant, strident, and or acolytic, these defenders will gaslight the public for their own purpose. And what I'm saying is we shouldn't care about those people willing to gaslight us. If someone is willing to lie to you, what does their opinion matter to you? That's actually the value of propaganda, is they'll tell you stuff that's so crazy and then shame you for not believing it. But why is their opinion important if they're the crazy ones and you're the one grounded in reality? Anyway, so there's a swath of stories that'll never get covered, and the public will never have the chance to make decisions for themselves based on what mainstream media alone is informing them about. If a left-wing politician jeopardizes national security, takes millions of dollars from foreign nations, and is responsible for the deaths of millions of people, so on and so forth, and the public never knows about it because these journalists not only didn't investigate these stories, but actively participated in covering them up and castigating anyone who revealed the information. What benefit does that serve the public? The fact is, it doesn't. And there are other countries where they have their own Pravda or their own government-funded, sponsored media that cater to those in power, and our media needs to be better than that. And certainly what we've seen in the last couple years with, the Democrats and the mainstream media colluding with each other, attending parties with each other and doing all this crazy stuff, that's got to worry people on the left. And there are a few progressives on the left that are willing to call this out, like Alan Smithy and H.A. Goodman and some others I can't think of offhand. But if these leftist journalists are willing to go to nearly any lengths to cover up stories that goes against their political interests, that's bad. These people are willing to keep everyone on the left, right, the middle, whoever, uninformed and in the dark. That is bad. That's why politics is so polarized today, because the media refuses to objectively report the news. Another issue with being a right-wing reporter in a left-wing establishment is basically you don't get to publish your stories against the left. And we've seen people like Cheryl Atkinson have this against them, where she reported negative things about Obama, and then she sort of got shut down and then kicked out, and she's a left-winger, but not as left-wing as they'd like. And when she tries to be balanced and fair, that sort of went to heck. Anyways, that's a digression. But even if you have stories that are written balanced and fair, they'll ultimately not get those stories published. This on top of them disqualifying right-wing publication stories and fact-checking done by other publications, it leads to this world of a very narrow scope of approved information getting out to the public, because that's what the mainstream value is for. Niche media is typically for people on the fringes or whatever, and the mainstream is typically for everyone else. But if the bulk of all the information comes just from the left to everyone else, in order to steer everyone to the left, that is the problem. And if you're a leftist and you think that's okay, what if that was swung the other way and the right wing controlled all the media? You wouldn't like that. So all I'm asking is for a level of objectivity and fairness and justice in that sense. All right, so I'll start to wrap up here. If you're a conservative, moderate, Republican, or anyone else on the right or center right, you couldn't wish for anything better to unite us than the media going out of their way to promote fake news while complaining about fake news. Airing false stories on CNN, then demanding the president take her questions stemming from that fake material is a height of lunacy, for example, and is the worst the left-wing media could do. And that's what they love doing. You can definitely report on factual things and try to use that against the president. Most of us on the right would agree that that's the legitimate purpose of the press. But too many people on the left in the press are not willing to do that. And when the camera's on, they start grandstanding and it becomes this issue, and they're asking some honestly dumb questions or just bad questions in order to try to get something that's generally off topic. And I don't know. I just think that the press can do better in terms of reporting on what the president is doing. Many of my friends and family who post on social media are left-wingers, and what they post on social media tells me that they're getting only a portion of the information that they need to make intelligent decisions. And note that I'm not saying that these people are unintelligent. I'm saying that these people are uninformed. And the evidence for this is their criticism of Trump's supports for violence, for example, while not mentioning the fact that most of the violence comes from the left. And they try to use statistics that come from these articles, but when you drill down through the statistics, most of these claims aren't actually true, or they're biased. And so it's just clear to me that these TV pundits and hosts, etc., they're not interested in informing us as they are crafting a narrative. And they want you to essentially eat out of their hands. And they're selling us doom and gloom so that you'll keep coming back for more. This sense of urgency, for ratings or clicks or whatever. To sort of abuse an old metaphor, the grass is always on fire on the other side. And these people aren't here to give you perspective from the other side or put things in a fair context. They want it to be us versus them, the good guys versus the others from their point of view. I just think that's destructive to the bulk of us. So that's all I'm going to talk about in this episode. I may cover more topics along the lines of mainstream media, left and right wing bias and stuff like that, but this is mostly for left wing people that don't quite understand people on the right. And maybe I haven't properly made the case to explain why people like me distrust the media and why people like you, whoever watching this, should look at more sides of other things. For the last couple of years, I've listened to mostly liberal people online, and in the last year or so, I've switched over to listening to a bunch of neoconservatives. And keep in mind, that's as someone that's a libertarian / conservative that used to be a liberal in the 80s and then a conservative, then neoconservative in the 90s and the early 2000s, and then about 2006 was like, this is getting out of control, and I basically aimed more towards libertarian / conservatism. And so most of what I watch and listen to and read is from now neoconservatives, but formerly from liberals and to some extent progressives, mostly because I was interested as I was getting back into politics and other topics, looking from all these angles. So that's why I have a really good grasp of what the other people think or believe or who they're listening to and stuff, because I've allowed myself to experience the other side, and I've actually lived from the other side years and decades ago. So now I can more properly ground myself as a conservative and a libertarian. So a somewhat traditional conservative. I'm technically a social, moderate, and fiscal conservative, but whatever, I won't bore you with that. Long story short, I'm going to go ahead and cut it on this episode. Thank you very much for watching or listening or whatever, and have a great day.